Well, hi there. I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich, and I like to talk about leadership and engineering. Hey, in this video, I want to say a few comments about some original research I did. I actually did the research a couple years ago, but you can actually get the papers. They're on tomulrichconsulting.com. If you go to, I think there's a pull down that's something like academic papers or something. Anyway, one of them was qualitative study. I've mentioned this one before. This is the same study that I mentioned. What should we expect of principal engineers? And another important takeaway from that study is and what I did is I found six engineers who are very senior engineers, principal engineers, who had been asked to become managers and said no. And one of the unmistakable takeaways is not every engineer wants to be a manager. And a lot of times people who are managers can't wrap their head around this, especially people who aren't engineers. And uh, what I did is I did a follow-up theory piece where I kind of thought a little bit about how to kind of explain it. And I proposed a theory. I haven't tested the theory yet, so it's just a theory. But by looking at sort of revisiting the data from that one and also revisiting the data from a different study where I talked to six engineers who had recently been promoted to managers. So I had six who said, yes, I want to be a manager, and different six. And this study was like a year later, said, no, I don't want to be a manager. And I pretty much asked them the same questions. And really the surprising thing is I was thinking I would hear very different responses, and all the questions were really aimed at the concept of motivation to lead. And what I really thought I would see is a difference in how they answered, because some said yes and some said no. And the really shocking thing is they all pretty much gave the same reasons. And, so the reasons the six who accepted management positions was the same reasons that the other six declined it. So what I think there is, I think the concept is um, engineers want to influence, and the difference is they see the best avenue of influence differently. So the six who accepted the promotions really saw that, believed that by becoming a manager they can have maximum impact on the organization, whereas the six who said no really believed that the way they could have maximum impact on the organization was not uh, by being a manager. So what I think is happening, I think it really all boils down to role models. And I think in your organization, I think if you have bad engineering managers, I think engineers tend to see that and kind of like, this guy's a joke. I don't want to be part of it. And so, when you tolerate a bad engineering manager, that's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, because not only does it, create the havoc that a bad leader creates, but it also pretty much guarantees that the people who probably ought to be doing that role just are saying, I don't want any part of that kind of thing. And one final note is, so the unavoidable truth is there are engineers who um, don't want to be managers, and particularly if they've had a lot of role models that are negatives, bad managers, as well as positive role models of, engineers who aren't managers but really influence them. They'll want to stay. And the thing to know is, if you try to make engineer a manager against his will, you're going to lose that engineer. So I've seen it happen both ways. I've seen it where the engineer gets frustrated and quits, says, I don't want to be a manager, they quit. That's actually kind of my story early on. Sometime I'll tell that story, where I was introduced as a manager. They didn't talk to me ahead of time, introduced in front of a group of 25 people. And yeah, God, I wanted to, at any rate, so crazy. But the other thing that I've also seen is people make someone who didn't really want to be a manager, and then they didn't do well, and then they got frustrated and fired them. And in both those cases, a lot of times people will kind of use the logic, well, let's take our best engineer and make him a manager. And the reality is, if you try to take a good engineer and try to make him a manager, a lot of times what happens, you end up with neither. They're no longer able to do engineering because they got all this stuff, and they're not really good at management, and so you kind of have just nothing. At any rate, so that's my thought there. Recapping, not all engineers want to be managers, and making an engineer doesn't want to be a manager. Forcing them to be a manager is usually a terrible idea, and probably the most important thing you can do to help people want to be engineering managers is to really model or sort of control who's in the organization and who are the role models and who are the people they see that form their view of management. At any rate, thanks for listening. I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich, the Engineering Leadership Guy. You can find more videos at tomulrichconsulting.com, or you can go right to YouTube and search on Dr. Tom Ulrich. And at any rate, we'll talk to you later.